Alrighty then, my little friends here. Today we are going to start Unit 4, which is the unit on the nervous system and the endocrine system. Now, we'll start with the nervous system. This is chapter 14, I believe, in your textbook. But this unit 4, is all about systems in the body whose sole purpose is to maintain homeostasis. The digestive system obviously does digestion. The cardiovascular system transports materials throughout the body and so on. But the nervous and endocrine systems together they're pretty much their main focus, and their only focus is communication throughout the body, but with the higher purpose of maintaining homeostasis. And so that's their goal. So let's start with a discussion of the nervous system. The nervous system allows for communication between cells through sensory input, integration of data, and motor output. Now, I want you to remember those terms, all right? Sensory input, integration of data, and motor output. And the reason that I say that is because the system itself is repetitive on multiple levels. And so you'll see those same three tasks, if you will, for all throughout the system, from the cellular level to the tissue level, even to the organ level. All right, sensory input, integration of data, motor output. All right, and so that's what we're going to talk about. Now, there are two types of cells in the nervous system. There are neurons and neuroglia. Now, the neurons are the ones that get all the glory. They're the superstars, if you will. They're the ones that actually carry the messages from one part of the body to the next, or perhaps within the brain. But the neuroglia are the unsung heroes. These are the cells that actually support the neurons. All right, they take care of the neurons, and without them, the neurons would be in a lot of trouble. So here we go. Let's talk about the structure of neurons. Now, first of all, there are three kinds: sensory, inter, and motor. Now, a sensory neuron is something that receives a stimulus, an impulse from outside of the body, or maybe inside of the body, but it receives those, receives those impulses through a receptor of some sort. Now, some examples of receptors might be your eyes, your ears, all your other senses, but they can also be internal. All right, you've got sensors inside that tell you your blood pH is too low. You've got sensors inside that tell you your body is too warm, and so on. And so sensory receptors come both inside and outside the body. I don't know why it keeps doing this. The sensory neuron. Sorry. The sensory neuron is this neuron here, okay? And you can see that it's taking impulses and bringing it to the second portion, which is the interneuron. These are neurons that are found mostly inside the central nervous system. And then finally, the third kind, which is shown here, is the motor neuron. And this is carrying impulses away from the brain to some other portion of the body. Now, all three of these neurons, and I'll try to go back here, but all three of these neurons will actually have the same major body parts. All right, if you look very carefully, each of the three of them have a cell body. There's a cell body here, a cell body here, and a cell body here. All right, these are where the cell keeps its organelles, its mitochondria, its endoplasmic reticula, and all of that kind of stuff. But each of the three cells receives signals through a dendrite The dendrites for the sensory receptors, for the sensory neurons are the receptors. The dendrites for the other two are these hairy-looking things on the outside, okay? And then finally, they all send messages through a long piece called the axon. And that long piece is fairly apparent if you look carefully. Here's the axon of the sensory neuron. Here's the axon of the interneuron. And then notice how long the axon of the motor neuron is, okay? So the myelin sheath is a lipid covering on long axons that acts to increase the speed of nerve impulse conduction. It also helps to insulate the nerve, and sometimes in the peripheral nervous system, it can help in regeneration. Now, insulation you probably are aware of, all right? If you look at an electrical wire, okay, the wire itself is covered, right? The metal inside is covered by rubber or plastic. And the reason that is because we don't want the electricity to escape. Well, that lipid covering in the myelin sheath does the same thing on nerves. But and it's generated by what we call Schwann cells. All right, these are also known as oligodendrocytes, but we'll get back to that later. These are neuroglia, support cells that make up the myelin sheath in the peripheral nervous system. Now, the nodes of Ranvier are gaps between myelination. Now, I'm going to go back on purpose this time. And so this right here is a node of Ranvier. You can see one labeled here, okay? And so what happens is that the impulse actually jumps from one to the next, 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 to the next. All right, and so the impulse is jumping, and that is what I mean when I say this should be stultatory, S-T-A-L-T. All right, stultatory conduction, like a stutter. But this is the conduction of the nerve impulses from node to node, and that helps the speed of the impulse from beginning to end go much, much faster. Now, this is a short video on what's called the action potential, and it explains the chemical reactions at the cell membrane level that allows an impulse to travel from one side of the jump, 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 jump. All right, so how does the action potential get carried from one end of the nerve, the axon, to the other end? All right, so please take a moment and copy this link into your interweb browser and have a look. It's a good little video. Now, last but not least, what happens when an electrical impulse reaches the end of the axon? Okay, well, then we reach what's called the axon terminal. The axon terminal is this big, wide, flat thing that you see here. Okay, and so that's where the impulse, the electricity, will end. And the reason that it ends is because the electric impulse can't jump from this plasma membrane into this plasma membrane, okay? And so we have two membranes, the presynaptic membrane, that's the sending cell, and the postsynaptic membrane, that's the receiving cell. And so because the electrical impulse can't jump across it, we have to find a different way to transmit that signal. We do this through chemicals. Now, if you think back to the musculature system, remember what happened when the nerve impulse reached the muscle fiber? We had to send chemicals across the gap between those two plasma membranes. Well, exactly the same thing is happening here. All right. So there are neurotransmitters held in little vesicles here in the axon terminal. And once the electrical impulse has reached the axon terminal, calcium will come in, and that will change the permeability of the plasma membrane, and it'll allow not only calcium to come in, but it will also allow the neurotransmitters stored in the vesicles to come out. They will diffuse across that synapse, the gap there, and be received on receptor proteins on the postsynaptic membrane. Okay, so the nerve impulse reaches the axon terminal. Calcium ions enter the axon terminal, which stimulates the synaptic vesicles to release their neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters go across that synaptic gap by diffusion again, and eventually bind with the postsynaptic membrane. Okay. Now, one more thing. Either those neurotransmitters can excite the postsynaptic cell, or they can inhibit the postsynaptic cell. And so sometimes you stimulate the nerves and you keep going. Sometimes you actually say, you know what, we're not going to send that message anymore, and we just kind of slow everything down. All right, we'll talk about that a little bit more in part 2 of our discussion of the nervous system.